Hello. Welcome back to Wednesday Word. Thank you, as always, for joining me. I pray that you've had a wonderful week and spent some time in the Word, and that you're ready to dive back in with me as we continue our study of the patriarch Abraham. Last time, we had actually read a portion of Genesis 19 that was not specifically about Abraham per se, but more about Lot and the decisions he made after Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim were destroyed. Now, you might recall that Lot had persuaded the angel to allow him to go to a small nearby little city, Zoar, and that he had been allowed to do that even though Zoar was originally targeted to be destroyed with the other 4 little cities. And so the angel had allowed him to do that. Now, I don't know why Scripture doesn't specify why, after begging to go to Zoar because he did not feel safe going to the mountainous area, really it was hills nearby that the angel had originally instructed him to do, but he had begged to go to Zoar because he would feel safer. And now, because he's afraid, he's going up into that hilly region nearby. That doesn't make any sense. We have to just assume that he is placing his trust, his trying to draw maybe feelings of security from where he is instead of from the God who has already protected him. In any case, after begging to go to Zoar, he and his 2 daughters relocated to a cave nearby in a mountain, hill, whatever you want to call it. And so in that cave, which makes no sense, they left the comforts of a civilized, populated little city for a cave, but in that cave, unthinkable sin takes place. We almost wish we did not have this final chapter of Lot's life, but we do. We actually have the byproduct of a lot of years of choices that were not good for Lot's family. His daughters had been raised in a little community in a small city where sin was not the exception, it was the norm. It was blatant sin, it was sexual sin, it was open sin. It wasn't even just behind closed doors. There were unspeakable acts of immorality publicly displayed, and long-term exposure to that kind of sinful atmosphere had obviously desensitized his daughters to moral standards that should have been deeply entrenched in their lives, but were not at all. In fact, it is obvious that these girls have not been taught to put their faith and trust in God, to believe that He will work all things out, to conduct themselves on a high moral standard, to be obedient to the expectations of a holy God. So they're both wrong, but part of me wants to blame the older daughter more because she's the one who suggests, based on some really faulty logic, a heinous kind of sin, the sin of incest. She tells her sister, look, there are no men left for us to marry and raise up heirs to our father. Now, I get it. If she was looking out the mouth of that cave down into that valley, she probably saw devastation because that's what was there. Now, we don't have any idea if she could see Zoar, which had been spared from where she was. But she knew surely there were some men in Zoar, they had just left there. But this idea, there's no one left for us to marry. We need to raise up heirs to our father, carry on his lineage, led to that horrible decision. No dependence on God, self-devaluation is all I can call it. Certainly they were not using any kind of logic. So instead of looking at facts, trying to see what their options are, part of me wonders, did they not know they could go to their Uncle Abraham and he would protect them, even arrange marriages for them? But their minds were not in that direction. When our thinking has been clouded by sin, we do not make good choices. Even though they had not participated in that, they had been desensitized by the wicked culture in which they lived. That's a warning for all of us. We must not allow the culture to define us. We must impact the culture, not the other way around. So they make a decision. The older daughter is going to get their father drunk the first night and sleep with him, and then the younger daughter can do the same thing the second night. And that plan was launched. Now, I have to tell you, Lot is anything but innocent in this process. I want to know how drunk you have to be to not realize your daughter came to lie beside you on your sleeping mat and you committed a sexual act with her. It reminds me of blackouts and things that can happen if there is really excessive drinking. Proverbs 23 sends a strong warning about drinking to the point to where you're not even aware or cognizant of what is happening to you, passing out in a stupor and waking up wondering where your next drink is. The Bible speaks very clearly of the fact that sin does not mean one thing. There are categories of sins. There are kinds of sins. God does not classify them. Missing the mark of His standard is missing the mark of His standard. We often, as a culture, judge some things more harshly, and I have to say that whether it's homosexual sin or incest or sex outside of marriage, whatever it is, God says sin is sin, and sexual sin throughout Scripture is abhorrent in the sight of God because He equates being unfaithful to Him with idols, with adultery and sexual immorality. I remind you that 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17 say, "Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever," because we know there is eternal life for those people. So whatever degree of faith and or righteousness Lot possessed, the one thing he did not do is lead his family to embrace faith, to live and model a life of righteousness, to live it out, to carry out and practice what we say we believe. And Lot, I repeat, is not innocent in this at all. So those incestuous encounters resulted in pregnancies for both daughters. The firstborn daughter gave birth to a son and called his name Moab. Now, you'll be interested to know the name Moab comes from a Hebrew root word meaning through our father. Isn't that interesting? This baby Moab became the father of the Moabites. The descendants of this grandson of Lot, this son of Lot's older daughter, was responsible, among other things, for heinously, deliberately setting up seduction of the Israelites. It's recorded in Numbers 25. And the Israelites were invited to participate in sacrifices to Moabite gods. We know that orgies went with those, all sorts of heinous things. And the people of God ended up yoked to Baal of Peor, an idol. They were participating in idol worship. They were sexually engaging with the Moabite women. They were bringing the Moabite women into their tents to make them concubines. In fact, God said that the zeal of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, turned God's wrath from Israel, and that's what spared them over that incident. You remember that Phinehas took a spear and thrust it through a man and the Moabite woman he had taken in his tent, spear straight through both of them. The Moabites, though God blessed them, though God gave them land, the Moabites were not godly people. They were idol worshipers. Lot's younger daughter gave birth to a son and named him Ben-Ammi. Interestingly enough, Ben-Ammi means son of my kin. It doesn't mean son of our father, but it's the closest thing to it. He became the father of the Ammonites, and they were responsible for human sacrifices to the god Molech. Leviticus 18:21. And you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And the Ammonites did that. They were wicked, idol-worshiping people, even though God blessed them and they had land, and there are lots of incidents associated with them. I won't go there. You get the picture. Now, before we go into the next section, having addressed what happens to Lot, the sin of Lot's daughters with their father and Lot's guilt in that process, let me remind you that Abraham and Sarah have had an incident where Sarah was passed off as Abraham's sister. That took place in Egypt. Remember, they went down to Egypt because there was a famine and a drought. And since then, God has affirmed his covenant with Abraham. He has incorporated Sarah specifically into that covenant as well. And that all happened it started in Genesis 12, but now we're in Genesis 20 with a freshly affirmed covenant with the promise that there is going to be an heir, and with some interesting things about to happen. Let's go to Genesis chapter 20 and verse 7. I'll let the word speak for itself. And Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, "She is my sister." I have not gone back to Genesis 12. This is Genesis 20. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Sound familiar? But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife." But Abimelech had not come near her. And he said, "Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she, even she herself, said, 'He is my brother.' In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. And God said to him in a dream, Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. Okay, so many thoughts go through our minds as we read this short passage. We remember Genesis 12. We remember what happened when Abram, that was his name at that time, went down to Egypt and had coached Sarah, she was Sarai at that time, to say that she was his sister. She did that. Pharaoh's household was basically cursed. There were plagues. There were things that were not going right. God's blessing was not resting on the women and the reproduction. And here we are again. This time, we were never told when Abram was in Egypt how Pharaoh came to know that Sarai was Abram's sister. Here we're told plainly that Abimelech had a dream. And he's warned, if you don't give Sarah back to Abraham, you are a dead man. Now that's really strong. We are told very plainly here that Abimelech had not brought Sarah to his chambers. There had been no sort of sexual consummation between them, so he has not committed that sin. And the indication here is that God spared him from that. Now, we can't help but wonder, why on earth has Abraham made the same dishonorable choice, the same regrettable mistake, if you want to give him that much grace, not once but twice? Why would God's chosen representative, a friend of God, err in a way like that and give a pagan king opportunity and well-deserved grounds for rebuking him? Why would he do that? The only logical response is that he has resorted to deceit. At worst, misrepresentation is the nicest word I can think of, because of the fact that he still has some fear, because there is at least, I didn't say he has no faith, but his faith is not strong enough to believe that God will protect him. Now, he had left Hebron, where he had been for a pretty good while. He wasn't exactly in Hebron, but nearby, remember, near the terebinth trees of Mamre. And he had headed south somewhere between Kadesh and Shur. And Gerar was a caravan route. It would have been a well-traveled route. And it was kind of north of Shur and kind of on the way to Gaza, in some very familiar territory there. Now, nobody knows exactly how close to Gerar he was, but he was in Philistine territory here. That's logical. He's done the same thing he did in Egypt. Obviously, the king of, or the ruler of, Gerar has taken Sarah. Abimelech is that ruler's name. God has warned him in a dream. And notice, not just him and his household will be dead if he doesn't do something about giving Sarah back to Abraham. So, Abraham appears before him, and understandably, Abimelech is indignant and angry. He's already asked God something that sounds very familiar. It sounds like what Abraham asked God when the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah were the topic of discussion. Would you destroy a righteous nation? And my mind is thinking, the Philistines, a righteous nation? I mean, what's the deal with that? Probably not that righteous. But apparently Abimelech, as rulers in that day go, must have been a cut above the norm because of the way he conducts himself here. Now, Abraham had insisted that Sarah was his sister. Sister Sarah had insisted that Abraham was her brother. And Abimelech is like, well, what I did was innocent. I had no idea she was anybody's wife. So he's got some standards. He's feeling indignant. He questions God, and he questions the content of the dream that's been revealed to him. But I will say he doesn't have an absolute throwdown fit. He meets the issue squarely. He's going to address it. God told him to return Sarah to Abraham because Abraham was a prophet. Did you notice that? Now, that's probably deserves some explanation because we're used to Isaiah, Jeremiah, Joel, and Malachi, Obadiah, those guys saying, "Thus saith the Lord, if you don't get your lives right and turn from idols, God's going to send destruction." That's not exactly what is meant here. We know that Abraham is God's friend. He's in a covenant relationship with God. He has believed, and it's been accounted as righteousness to him. At times, he has shown some humanity and some little wavering, and this is another one of those times. But he has a special relationship with God. Maybe not what we expect from the prophets toward the end of the Old Testament, but certainly there's a calling on his life. There's a covenant relationship with God. There's a special relationship with God. Now, we want to question that because of those times that he falters. But before we do that too extensively, let me remind you that sometimes that we struggle too. And we want to do what's right, but sometimes what is right is challenging, and we're flawed. We're not perfect, but we need to strive to do our very best to be more like Jesus and to do a good job of honoring God all the time. Okay, so we have an indignant Abimelech. We have an Abraham, and Abimelech has been told, look, this guy is a prophet. He'll pray for you and everything will be all right. You need to give back his wife. Now we're in verse 8 of chapter 20. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and told all these things in their hearing. And the men were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I offended you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done." Then Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you have in view that you have done this thing?" We would say, what were you thinking? What was in your mind to make you decide to do that? And Abraham said, "Because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, 'This is your kindness that you should do for me in every place wherever we go. Say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, and male and female servants, and gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, See, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you. Then to Sarah he said, Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you, and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked. Now notice, that seems odd in response to what was just said. I'll come back to that. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children, for the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Now, considering the warning that God gave Abimelech, if you don't give this man's wife back, I'm going to kill you and your entire household. And we always cringe, but it was a common practice in that time. When someone messed up badly, their whole household paid the price. You might recall that the men who trapped Daniel and caused the law to be signed that landed him in the lion's den, the next day those men and their entire households were thrown to the lions. It's a common practice. Abimelech is angry. It's understandable. Indignant is the nicest, kindest word I can ascribe to him. He's thinking, what on earth? I've never done anything to you. You have set me up for destruction here. What were you thinking? When he calls Abraham into his presence, as I've already mentioned, he chastises him. Now remember the question I asked right after I read this text? Why would Abraham give a pagan king justifiable reason to rebuke him, to chastise him? Abimelech wants to know, what on earth have I done to you that you put my entire kingdom, my household, in such a precarious and dangerous position because of circumstances you created? He contends that he did nothing to deserve the situation or to deserve punishment, and that it never should have happened because Abraham never should have put him into that position. Notice he also asked Abraham, what on earth did you perceive about me or my kingdom that led you to make that choice? Now, Abraham responds by launching into his explanation that, I thought this was a godless place, and I thought I would be killed because of Sarah. Now, you remember that Sarah is 89 or about to be 90, but apparently still beautiful, and Abraham continues to be fearful that anyone who sees her will want to put her in his harem or to marry her. And so he still is functioning out of fear. Excuse me. That begs the question. Lot made some horrible choices that were fear-based. His daughter's choices, well, I guess they were fear-based. They certainly weren't logical. But Abraham has a personal covenant with God. Part of me wants him to just trust God to take care of them wherever they go. I guess he does on some level, but he's still busy doing the same thing we're often tempted to do, and that's help God out. And he does not need that kind of help from us. He needs obedience and faithfulness from us. So Abimelech gives Sarah back to Abraham after only after he rebukes Abraham. He also gives him sheep and oxen and servants, and he's just generously loading him up with stuff. And he tells him, look, my entire land that I rule over is before you. Pitch your tents anywhere you want to pitch them. You can camp out there. It'll be all right with me. So he not only is generous about allowing Abraham to pitch his tents and giving him servants and livestock, but he also gives him 1,000 pieces of silver in what is a difficult concept to understand. We're not really sure about the exact meaning. Now, we know that somehow the gift was to affirm Sarah's innocence in the eyes of her household and those who traveled with them and everybody else for that matter. It was some sort of a gift that was associated with this idea of, look, here's this gesture between you and me that you know that I didn't do anything, that I didn't harm you in any way, and you can confirm that. But did you notice at the very end of that verse, it kind of indicated that he was rebuking Sarah as well, because she was a participant in that deception. So what does the language in that verse actually mean when Abimelech is supposedly affirming his innocence and that Sarah's virtue has not been compromised? Now, the original language says that this gift is a covering of the eyes for you. Some way justifying Sarah, as if people's eyes would be covered and not look at her and suspect any wrongdoing. Now that's a really modernization of that concept, so I hope I didn't take it too far. But that's what it seems to be saying. Now, okay, Abimelech is doing what he can do to make things right. Here's your wife back. Here are some pretty nice gifts, and here's an extremely nice gift, 100 pieces of silver to affirm Sarah's innocence. I wish I could tell you that kind of problem would never occur again. But the son of Abraham and Sarah, namely Isaac, and his wife are going to use the same deceptive methodologies because Rebekah also was beautiful. That's found in Genesis 26, verse 11. So Isaac dwelt in Gerar. Well, now Dad has been very near there before. And guess what? We know there's a ruler in that area. And the men of the place asked about his wife. And he said, she is my sister. For he was afraid to say, she is my wife, because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she was beautiful to behold. Okay, so obviously that's a problem. We will talk later about deception in Abraham's family line. So apparently Isaac had that same mix of faith and fear and that same tendency to use deception when he thought it would protect his skin. All right, now in Abimelech's household, let's go back to talking about him. The reproductive processes in that household, even in his livestock, had basically been stayed. And in that day and time, infertility in your home or among your livestock would have been a very frightening thing for the ruler. It would be a scary thing for Abimelech because it was important for the ruler to set the example of fertility and to look like favor rested on him. So a ruler should have many children and fast-producing livestock, and God had stopped those things. So Abimelech gave a generous gift to gain favor from God and with Abraham. And in return, Abraham prayed for him, asked that the affliction of God that had rested on him and on his household be removed so that they could find the favor that they desired in the area of reproduction. God answered that prayer. He healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants and his animals so that there would be offspring and children born. Now, Abraham left Abimelech, but I can't think but help that even if Abraham left wiser, that he most definitely left with some serious issues to reflect upon. I would think that he left a little bit sadder that a pagan king seemed to have the integrity in the situation and ended up being the one who rebuked Abraham. Nevertheless, though he's probably a sadder man, we know that he can see and continues to see Jehovah at work to fulfill the covenant destiny that is promised to Abraham. Okay, back to our text. Now we are in chapter 21, verses 1 through 7. And the Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, who Sarah bore to him, Isaac. And then Abraham circumcised his son when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. Now, this chapter actually begins with a statement that the Lord visited Sarah. The word that's translated visited there has a sense of a specific visit with the intention to bring blessing or judgment to the person visited. And of course, here we know that it's a blessing, for sure blessing, because God has come to bring the fulfillment of the promise that he has made so very long ago to the old patriarch, that Sarah would conceive and bear a son at this stage of her life was nothing short of miraculous. It was a treasured blessing that God came and visited to bring. Literally, a miracle had occurred, all through the power and grace of God. It had been 25 years since God originally made the promise to Abraham that he would have a son, and that was in Genesis 12 and verse 4. That son that was promised was the son through whom the covenant would be continued and set up to be in perpetuity until God's perfect will was accomplished. And now this promised son has finally been born, and it has been born by Sarah, not a handmaiden or a servant girl or a secondary wife, but the covenant mother, the one that God has said will be mother to rulers and to nations. Now, waiting is hard for people. It's hard for us. It's a test of the degree to which we trust God and are waiting patiently for the fulfillment of His promises. Even though God tarries in fulfilling His promises, He always keeps them. He just does it His way and in His own perfect timing. One of my favorite passages, and there are many of those, is Lamentations chapter 3, verses 21 through 26. Listen to the wording. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I hope in Him. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him. Do what? He's good to those who wait for Him, to the soul who seeks Him. It is good that one should hope and wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. So His compassions, His mercies, new every morning, never fail. There's a blessing pronounced on those who wait and wait trusting in faith. And for those who wait trusting in faith, waiting quietly in the presence of the Lord, in the peace of the Lord, there is salvation, there is help, there is deliverance that will come. Now, it was Abraham's privilege to name his son and then to circumcise him when he was 8 days old. Remember, the number 8 in Scripture is symbolic for or representative of new beginnings. So on the 8th day, baby boys were circumcised. On the 8th day, Jesus was taken to the temple because everything that was done to little Jewish boys was done to him. He was circumcised. He was trained in the law. He followed that pattern. Remember, He said He didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it, to complete it. All right, now, so there is this blessing on those who wait. Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years for this baby, and finally he came. Now, it's interesting because Sarah is very happy. Obviously, her prayers have been answered. Her dream is fulfilled. This little boy is named Isaac, and we know that it is associated with laughter. And Sarah says, almost as if God had prepared laughter for her, deliberately and on purpose. Now, in our day and age, if there were a couple still alive who had a baby that young, people would have lots of questions and there would be a lot of laughter and poking fun at that they were too old to have a baby or whatever. But when Sarah laughs here, it is not doubtful laughter. It is not questioning laughter. It is joyous laughter, because now she holds literally in her arms this baby who is God's gift to the world, who is the source through which the covenant will continue, but he is the baby that has brought her unspeakable joy and laughter in her old age. Sorry. Now, certainly, this laughter was nothing like the laughter that we've examined already. Remember, Abraham laughed in Genesis 17:17. Sarai, actually he was Abram then, she was Sarai, laughed in Genesis 18:12. It was a laughter of unbelief. It was more about the past than the present. But this is not that. It is joy beyond human expectation. And proof positive that God has kept his promise. Okay, my time is flying. Back to our text, verses 8 through 13. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. I'll come back to that. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad, or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed. So Isaac is growing. He's not a little baby in arms anymore. He's now a toddler. He's being weaned. And culturally, that means he's about 3. Now, we would be appalled that a 3-year-old was still nursing, but that was the culture. And so in that day and time, not only would he be weaned at around 3, but there would be a big party to celebrate the weaning, like a rite of passage, an occasion to be joyous and to feast. And Abraham followed the custom of the times. He threw a big celebratory party. Now, unfortunately, not everything that happened at that party was exactly just right. And it goes without saying that not everybody at that party was equally happy. Certainly, Abraham and Sarah were happiest. In the course of this party, Ishmael does something to Isaac or toward Isaac that infuriates Sarah. Now, it's hard to say exactly what the boy did. We know that Sarah had some challenges because of Hagar, when Hagar found out she was pregnant and her mistress could not bear Abraham a son. So there was some strife and there were some things said and or done. We're not really sure. Remember, we talked about that at that time. But there's a history here of Hagar participating in that kind of behavior, and now here's Ishmael. So Sarah has had it up to about right here. She is livid. Now, this word that's translated scoffing, that Ishmael was scoffing Isaac, it means playing, laughing, or reproaching. We are truthfully really not sure what Ishmael did. The very same word is used in Genesis 39:14, and in that verse it is translated as mock. Genesis 39:13 and 14. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and he is Joseph, and fled outside, that she, and she is Potiphar's wife, called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, See, he has brought to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me, He came into me to lie with me, and cried out with a loud, and I cried out with a loud voice. I'll get that verse out right. Maybe I better try that again. He came into me, Potiphar's wife is accusing Joseph, to lie with me. And I cried out with a loud voice. So she makes herself innocent and Joseph guilty of a terrible sin. That same word that's used of Ishmael's behavior is used by Potiphar's wife here in describing Joseph at this particular point in time. Now, there are references to two kinds of covenant in the New Testament. And the issues between Ishmael and Isaac are used to illustrate those two covenants, where Ishmael represents the law and Isaac represents grace. Paul uses this same word again that's used about Ishmael, and in his writing, it is translated as persecution. That's found in Galatians 4:28 through 31. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. So Isaac fulfilled the promise made to Abraham and to Sarah, and we are a fulfillment of promise because Jesus prayed himself, as many of those as you give me, I want to keep those to present them to you. So we're children of promise, children grafted into the covenant, heirs and joint heirs with Christ through the grace of God. Back to Galatians 4:28. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit. How was Ishmael born according to the flesh? Well, Sarah comes up with a plot, and Abraham goes along with her, and Hagar is drug into the triangle that represents their home. And notice what it says, that Ishmael persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit. Even so it is now. Nevertheless, what does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. So, truthfully, it really probably doesn't matter what Ishmael said or did toward Isaac. What really matters is that it was a final straw with Sarah. She was ticked. She was unhappy. As a result of Ishmael's offensive behavior, she officially lays down the law. Okay, this is it. They have to go. She tells Abraham to cast out the bondwoman Hagar and her son Ishmael. But I remind you that her son is also Abraham's son. Now, we don't know exactly what's behind all of this. All we have is what's printed and an understanding of human nature. Did you notice that Sarah said, he will not be heir with my son? I remind you, he was Abraham's son as well. He was the promised son. He was God's promise. But she was feeling, let's just say her feelings were riled up at that point. So that's a little bit of a jab there, that Ishmael couldn't be heir with her son. Ishmael was not her son. It was a whole different thing. Now, we don't know what drove Sarah behind the scenes. Maybe there was an element of fear there. Maybe she was uncomfortable with Ishmael playing with Isaac and appearing to be on equal ground, and then one day when it's time for inheritance, would Abraham just keep the ground equal? I mean, she had some sort of insecurity going on. She had to. Now, there's no doubt that Abraham would have felt great sadness, great loss, great remorse. He loves Ishmael, and rightly so. That is his son. And remember, on occasions he has pleaded with God, well, well, remember my son Ishmael? What about him? What about blessing him? And God would constantly say, yes, he'll be blessed because of you, but he's not the promised son for the covenant. That son will be born to Sarah. There's no doubt that Abraham was sad. I'm sure he was very sad. So what brought him to the place that he could actually send his own son away? Now we know he's being obedient to God. God has told him to do that. But God has made him a promise that he's going to make Ishmael a great nation. Now, if Abraham trusts God, and if God has said, I'm going to make Ishmael a great nation, doesn't that stand to reason then that Ishmael is going to be safe, he's going to grow and prosper, and he's going to have lots of children, and his children are going to have lots of children until he's a nation? Now, even though Ishmael would not be the recipient of the covenant blessing, he would be blessed. He would become a nation. His offspring would be many. So, okay, God's going to make Ishmael a nation. Why? Because Ishmael is so wonderful? No. God tells Abraham, I'm going to make him a nation out of deference and favor to you because he's your son, not because of Ishmael himself per se. Now, I think it's important that we realize that at this point in time, Isaac's about 3. But Ishmael is not a young child. Remember that Ishmael was 12 or 13 when he was circumcised, and there was a 10-year gap before Isaac was born, and Isaac's now about 3 years old. So that makes Ishmael 16 or 17 years old enough to know and understand what he's doing, old enough to follow God's rules. Okay. The next passage has a tendency to paint a picture that makes us think that Ishmael is very young. That is not true. I have time to read it, but we won't have time to get very far with it. Listen to Genesis 21:14-21. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, that's Hagar, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba, and the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at the distance of about a bow shoot. For she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. But she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the mountains and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So Abraham gets up early, gives some provisions to Hagar, sends her and Ishmael on their way. Again, we wonder about that. How could Abraham do that? And I am totally convinced it's because he believed God's promise. Israel would not only survive, he would thrive. God would make him a great nation. So we're told that Hagar left wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba, and we'll soon learn that that probably means Well of Seven, in the area later known as the Negev. Certainly it was harsh terrain, it was challenging country. And this is not the first time that Hagar has been in a challenging area. As I said before, we saw that in Genesis 16, 7 through 13. It's helpful for us to know that Beersheba is on the border of Egypt. It's about 50 miles south of Jerusalem and about 27 miles south of Hebron. It's the last point that is a point worth noting in all of the land of Egypt. When their water ran out and Ishmael became exhausted, his mother put him under a tree. And she had all but given up hope. But see, God was not finished. And so I say to you today, if the situation is bleak and you've almost given up hope, hang on, because God is not finished. Walk in that encouragement until I'm back with you next time and we take up this story right where we left off. God bless.